My wife moved $195,000 out of our joint accounts on a Sunday night, and I didn't find out until Monday morning when the bank alert hit my phone while the coffee was still brewing. 3 transfers, spread across 48 hours, each one clean and deliberate, like someone who'd rehearsed the steps until they stopped feeling like steps and just felt like motion. I stood in the kitchen of our house in Bellevue with the mug in one hand and the phone in the other, and I read the notification 3 times because my brain kept rejecting it. 14 years of saving. 14 years of saying no to the renovations and the vacations and the truck I actually wanted. The college fund I'd opened the month my son was born, when he was still so new that I was afraid to hold him too long for fear I'd do something wrong. The emergency savings. The backup to the backup. Everything I had stacked up between my family and the kinds of problems money can't fix once it's gone. 3 transfers, 48 hours, 0. I called my wife. 1 ring and straight to voicemail. I called again. Same. I opened the Find My app out of some reflex I didn't even consciously make and saw what I think I already knew I'd see. Her location had been turned off. At some point in the night, while I was asleep in the same bed, she'd disabled it. The kind of thing you do when you've already made your decision and you just need a head start. I walked down the hall to my son's room. He was 16, a junior, a kid who on a normal Monday would need 2 alarms and a knock on the door before he'd even turn over. I knocked. The door opened immediately. He was dressed, sitting at his desk with his laptop open. He looked up at me with an expression I had never seen on him before, composed in a way that wasn't calm, the way a person looks when they've been bracing for something and it's finally arrived. He said, "Dad, I know, I've known for 6 weeks." I didn't answer. I just stood in the doorway with the phone in my hand and the bank alert still glowing on the screen. "Sit down," he said. "I'll show you everything." My son's name is Kieran. He's going to matter in this story more than anyone else, so I want you to understand who he is before I tell you what he did. He's the kind of kid who reads instruction manuals for fun, not because he's anxious or compulsive, but because he genuinely wants to understand how things work before he touches them. When he was 12, he taught himself basic HTML to build a fan site for a video game he liked. When he was 14, he spent a month learning spreadsheet functions because he wanted to track his own savings with more precision than a notebook allowed. He's not a prodigy. He's just patient in a way that most adults aren't, and observant in a way that most people don't recognize as a skill until it's too late to pretend it isn't one. He sat across from me in his desk chair that morning and talked for 2 hours. I listened. I asked questions when I could form them. He answered each one with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this conversation in his head many times and wanted to get it right. It had started 6 weeks earlier. He'd borrowed my wife's laptop to print a chemistry lab report because his own printer had jammed. He opened a browser tab, navigated to the print queue, and a notification slid in from the upper right corner before he could look away. He read it without meaning to. "Thursday is confirmed. Don't use the work account anymore." He closed the laptop. He set it down on the kitchen counter exactly where he'd found it. He went to his room and sat on the edge of his bed and thought about what to do. What he did not do was come to me. Not yet. He told me why, and I've turned it over in my head 100 times since. He said that coming to me with a feeling wasn't the same as coming to me with proof. That suspicion without evidence would only hurt me twice. Once when I heard it, and once when it couldn't be confirmed. He said he wanted to be certain before he handed me something this heavy. He was 16. He'd thought this through more clearly than most adults think through most things. So he started paying attention. He had kept a running document on his laptop, dated entries, time-stamped, typed in his flat, careful way. Tuesdays and Thursdays, my wife left work early. She told me she had client site visits. But Kieran had noticed that the family sharing location settings on his phone were still linked to hers. A setup we'd arranged 2 years ago so I could track him when he drove. And on 2 separate Tuesdays, her location wasn't at any job site. It was a loft building near Lake Union, about 12 minutes from our house. The man she was meeting was named Aaron. Kieran found the name by cross-referencing the firm directory for Keller and Vance Architecture, where my wife worked, with her contact list, which he'd glimpsed once when she left her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter. He hadn't gone looking. He'd glanced, and he'd remembered, because that's what he does. He showed me the logs, 14 separate entries, each one noting the time she left, the address the location pinged, the duration of the visit, the time she came home. I had been awake for all of those evenings. I had watched the news. I had washed dishes. I had assumed she was exactly where she said she was. Aaron isn't the main problem, Kieran said then. He pulled up a second folder. The money is the main problem. He walked me through it the way a doctor walks a patient through an imaging result. Carefully, methodically, watching for the moment comprehension arrives. 3 months prior, my wife had begun moving money in small increments. $200, $800, $1,200. Always late at night, always on evenings she said she was working. The transfers went to an entity I didn't recognize, Cascade Horizon LLC, a name that meant nothing to me. Kieran told me to search my email for the name. I found a document sent by our accountant 9 months ago. My wife had forwarded it to me with a one-line note. Just estate planning stuff, sign where highlighted. I had opened the document, scrolled to the highlighted fields, signed electronically, and filed it in a folder I never checked again. The document had created Cascade Horizon LLC with both our names as founding members. She had used my signature to open the company. She had then used the company's accounts to move money in amounts small enough to avoid automatic bank flags. Over the course of 3 months, the total came to $195,000, the full balance of what we'd saved. I set my phone down on the desk. I looked at my son. He said, "There's one more part." He opened a screenshot from my wife's cloud backup account, which was still synced to a family iPad she'd apparently stopped using and forgotten about. In the backup was an email thread between my wife and a man named Stafford, mid-50s, listed on LinkedIn as a commercial real estate developer and private investor based in Seattle. He had wired Cascade Horizon $60,000 the previous month. His emails were professional and warm. He believed he was co-funding a boutique architecture studio concept in the Portland market. He believed Aaron was the design lead on a board-approved initiative. What Stafford didn't know was that Aaron believed he was the only outside party involved. My wife had been telling them 2 different stories. Aaron thought it was the 2 of them building something together. Stafford thought he was mentoring a legitimate business venture. Neither of them had been told about the other. I leaned back in the chair. Outside the window, the sound was flat and gray under the morning clouds. "How long did it take you to piece all of this together?" I asked. Kieran said, "About 3 weeks for the shape of it, another 3 to be sure." I looked at my son, this 16-year-old who had sat with this knowledge for 6 weeks, and said nothing because he wanted to hand me the whole truth at once, instead of leaving me to bleed over a wound he couldn't yet close. And I didn't have words for what I felt. Pride wasn't the right word. It was closer to grief that I'd made it necessary. "Okay," I said when I trusted my voice again. "What do we do?" He said, "I want to hear what you want first." I thought about it. I thought about the money, yes. I thought about the lie, yes. But more than either of those things, I thought about my son choosing to carry this alone so that I wouldn't have to face it without a floor under me. "I want what was taken back," I said. "I want her not to be able to rewrite this story, and I don't want to do anything I'd be ashamed of in 10 years. Kieran nodded. He said, "Then I have a plan." He called it Project Ironwood. Ironwood, he explained, is the densest native hardwood in North America. Almost impossible to cut with standard tools. He'd looked it up after he decided to stop feeling helpless. There were 3 fronts. The first was the company. My wife had been coordinating with Stafford using her work email server. Stafford had no relationship with Keller and Vance. He was a private investor, entirely outside the firm's operations. Using company accounts to run a personal side venture was a clear breach of her employment agreement. Kieran had preserved metadata from the cloud backup showing those emails originating from her work IP address during business hours. He printed 2 sets, sealed one in a plain envelope. The second front was Stafford. Kieran had spent 3 evenings building an anonymous email identity, a generic professional alias, a forwarding address, and sent Stafford a single message with 3 files attached. My wife and Aaron at a waterfront restaurant, hands across the table, a receipt from the same evening, charged to the firm's business card, a screenshot of an email where my wife wrote to Aaron, "He still doesn't know you're involved in the financial piece." Kieran didn't explain who he was. He just wrote, "You should know what you're actually funding." The third front was the money itself. I went to the bank the morning after Kieran and I talked. I added him as a co-owner on my personal account, which I had the right to do. I also placed a call to an attorney I'd worked with years earlier on a property matter and asked abstract questions about LLC member rights. What recourse existed when one member moved joint assets without the other's authorization? She didn't press me for details. I didn't offer them. That night, Kieran accessed the Cascade Horizon account using my credentials as co-founding member. The security questions my wife had set were my mother's maiden name and our wedding anniversary. He answered both without hesitating. At 11:17 p.m., $195,000 transferred back into my personal account. In the memo field, he typed one word, Ironwood. I went to work the next day and kept my face neutral and answered emails and approved a change order on a job site in Kirkland. At 9:45, Kieran texted. Stafford opened the email. At 11, a contact in the regional architecture community sent me a forwarded message, apparently accidentally included on a wider chain, in which Stafford was asking sharp questions of someone at Keller and Vance about a venture he'd funded through a current staff member. The firm's managing partner was copied. At 12:30, I heard through a colleague that my wife had been suspended pending investigation. Aaron had been called into a separate meeting with HR and was, by all accounts, telling a version of events in which she had deceived him about the firm's involvement. At 2, Kieran texted, Stafford filed a withdrawal notice. He's done. At 3:15, my wife called me for the first time in 36 hours. I let it ring. She called again. I answered. What did you do? Her voice was strange, compressed, like something trying to hold shape under pressure it wasn't designed to bear. The account is empty. There are emails going around the firm. Stafford isn't. Your transfers have been reversed, I said. All of it. It's back. Silence. That account is a joint LLC with my signature as co-member, I said. I had authorization. You can't. If you believe I acted improperly, call the bank or retain a lawyer. Either way, they'll want a full accounting of where the funds originated. I heard her breathing. Then the line went dead. I sat in my truck in the parking lot until I was sure my hands were steady, then drove home and told Kieran. He was at the kitchen table with a glass of water and a library book opened flat beside the glass. He looked up. I said it worked. He nodded once, the way he does when something lands where he expected it to, and went back to his book. She came to the house on a Wednesday night, just past 9. She knocked rather than using her key. I opened the door but left the screen between us. She stood on the porch in a coat that wasn't right for the rain, the kind of thing you grab when you're not thinking about weather anymore. Her face was tired in a deep way, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't touch. She said she needed to talk. I said, I'm listening. She told me things had changed between us years ago, and she hadn't known how to say it, that she'd wanted something different and made choices she couldn't take back, that she was sorry. The word came out worn, like something that had been carried a long distance and arrived damaged. I heard her. I didn't open the screen. When she finished, I said I could accept that she wanted out. What I couldn't accept was what she'd chosen to fund the exit with. She started to say something about the money being a shared resource. I said it was his. I started that account before he could walk. From down the hall, Kieran's voice came quiet and even, Mom. She looked past me. I didn't move aside. She said, Kieran, I want you to know. He said, I know what you want me to know. A pause, then I'm not sure it changes what you did. The porch light caught her face. She looked at me and asked what happened now. I passed an envelope through the screen door. The papers inside had been prepared that week. Divorce filings signed by me, a financial disclosure requiring her response, and a written acknowledgement of the unauthorized transfers that she could sign voluntarily. If she didn't, the bank's own inquiry process would run its course without her input. She held the envelope with both hands without opening it. She said, You win. I said, Nobody wins here, but our son doesn't lose his future. She walked to her car. I watched the headlights back out and disappear around the corner. Then I closed the door and stood in the dark hallway for a while, listening to the rain and the refrigerator hum and the very particular quiet of a house that is still standing. The divorce finalized 4 months later without a hearing. She'd signed the acknowledgement. She'd responded to the disclosure. The settlement was straightforward. The accounts, the house equity, and the full balance of the college fund transferred to me, held in trust for Kieran until he turned 18. She relocated to Portland. Keller and Vance had ended her employment. Aaron followed shortly after, once the scope of the side venture became clear to the firm's partners. Stafford recovered most of his investment through a civil filing against Cascade Horizon LLC. He didn't name her personally in the final settlement, but the association was documented and not invisible to anyone who looked. I don't know what her life looks like now. I stopped trying to picture it. Kieran applied to 3 colleges in the fall. He was accepted to all of them. He chose a university in Colorado, a program in computer science with a focus in systems security. The college fund covered 2/3 of it. A merit scholarship he won on his own covered the rest. I didn't need to take out a single loan. The night the acceptance came through, we went to the diner on the corner and ordered what we always order: eggs over easy for him, black coffee for me. We sat by the window with the parking lot lights coming in gray and yellow, and we talked about nothing consequential for 2 hours. At some point he said he thought he'd feel something bigger when it was all done. A door closing, he said. Something final. I asked what it actually felt like. He said it felt like quiet. I told him quiet was underrated. He smiled at that, the first full smile I'd seen from him in months, the kind that reaches the eyes. The check came and he grabbed it before I could get to it. Said he had it. Said it like it was already natural, like a version of himself he was already growing into. Maybe that's what it looks like when something ends and something else starts. Not a door slamming, just a kid picking up a check and meaning it. I've told this story a few times now, once to the attorney, once to a close friend, and now once here. I've found that telling it does something that living it couldn't. It puts a frame around it, and when it's in a frame, you can step far enough back to see what it actually was. What I see looking at it now is not a revenge story. It's a story about what it means to raise someone who pays attention. My son didn't build that case file out of anger. He built it out of love, for me, for himself, for the idea that the truth is worth the labor of finding it. He waited until he could hand it to me whole, not a feeling, not a fear, proof. I don't know how much of that came from me. I hope some of it did. But mostly I think some people are just built that way. Dense under pressure, steady when everything around them is shifting. Like ironwood, the hardest thing in the forest, and the one most likely to still be standing when the storm moves through. He's going to be fine. And slowly, so am I.